In this video, we're going to talk about 4 different ways of adding interesting textures to your work. I teach illustration, especially digital illustration on Skillshare. So one of the most common questions that I get is how to add textures to your illustration, especially working on iPad. So what I see a lot among my students' work is that I see people do a shape and then just like color drop it. There's nothing wrong with flat work, but if you're watching the video, I'm guessing you're looking for something to spice up your illustration, right? The first way I would suggest is to use a textured brush. For example, this one is the colored pencil, and instead of using color drop, I like to fill in my shapes with just coloring book technique. You do it stroke by stroke. By doing that, especially when you have a good textured brush, you will be able to show through. So if you zoom in, you can see that it doesn't fill in every single pixel within the area. Instead, it gives you a natural texture based on whatever brush that you choose. For example, if I'm picking a different one, maybe this gouache, it's a lot more solid, but still has some texture. And by the way, if you're interested in checking out my brushes, you will find the link in the description below. But the same principle applies regardless if you're using my brush or not. There are tons of really cool native Procreate brushes that you can use. For example, in this drawing folder, there are tons of brushes that has variation of texture. For example, this one not only has canvas background, but also have variation in transparency and color. So just by changing and switching to a textured brush, you can already add a lot of personality to this unassuming shape. The second tip I would give is to vary your color just ever so slightly. So this is a flat area on the left, and on the right, I'm gonna use the same brush. Say that my brush is not textured. And I'm just gonna vary the color just a tiny bit. So you tap on the color dot and change the saturation and the brightness, just maybe a few percent. Draw a little bit and then change it to a different version. And then now you have a different variation. You can just sample back and forth. This can get a little bit tedious if you're covering like super large area, but it is an interesting way to add texture. And you can use the blending brush, the finger icon, to blend it together. So I'm just gonna use a brush that is a little bit bigger, and then you can just blend it together. So even though it is the same glossy brush, the second area has a lot more texture. So that's another way of adding texture. Speaking of color variation, a lot of brushes in my brush sets already have the built-in function. For example, in my pastel brush, one of them is called Pastel Texture Builder. So this one, as you draw, will automatically vary colors, and it will build the texture for you. So you don't have to switch colors or use the smudge tool back and forth. So this will naturally give you some really rich background without shifting the color too much. Just to sum it up, the second way to add texture is to vary your colors just ever so slightly. And the third way to add texture is to draw within a shape. For example, if I am using a slightly darker blue, and then just even using the glossy pencil, the glossy pen, like just adding dots here and there, it's already really interesting. And there are tons of different non-boring way to add pattern. For example, I'm gonna create another flat area, but to add a new pattern, I'm gonna create a clipping mask on top of this flat area and switch the color just a tiny bit, and then go to one of my pattern brush. As you can see, this one creates like a seamless pattern. This one is probably one of my favorites. And then just by one long stroke, you're able to create a texture. And you can add a different version. So this one kind of have like the salted caramel look and feel. I really like that as well. And you can change the blending mode on top to create a different color combination. So the possibility is really endless. So just to sum it up, we have covered 3 ways to add textures. The first way is to pick a nice textured brush. And the second way is to color your areas like the coloring book. And the third way is to add patterns or drawings on top. Last but not least, if you just want to add textures for the borders of your shapes and drawings, you can choose a brush that is very rough on the edge, but very solid in the middle. Something like this. This is one of my fine liner brush. As you can see, when we zoom in, the solid part is in the middle. There's no transparency or color value variation, but the edges are very zigzaggy. So if you were to draw a shape like that and use the color drop, in the belly portion of the shape, it's pretty flat, but still you can see the texture around the edges. So that's the last way to add textures to your illustration. I hope this little tutorial can help you to take your illustration up a notch. Enjoy your day, and I will see you in the next video.